Hello and welcome to That's Not Spit, It's Condensation. I'm Ryan Beach, and I'm very excited today to do this episode with my good friend, Stephen Wadsack, right? Wadsack, not Wadsack. I've said that wrong for so many years. Stephen and I have been friends for a long time, and every time I think about how long we've been friends, I always like to talk about how we met, which was I was in a phase of my life a while back where I was drinking decaf coffee in the afternoon. And I would then post about it on Instagram, and we connected over that. You sent me like a message randomly about the coffee decaf coffee I was drinking. You were a coffee snob, basically. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah.
And so we just sort of connected over that, and then it was like 2021-ish. It was like kind of like when the pandemic was happening, but schools were coming back and schools were in session. I ended up reaching out to Michael Mergen and scheduled a visit to CCM. And I was like, where am I going to stay? And then randomly something you were doing on Instagram popped up, and you were like, I'm playing this concert in Cincinnati. I was like, oh my gosh, I looked at you. It was like, you live in Cincinnati. This is crazy. So I just reached out to you and I was like, hey, can I stay with you when I'm there? And you were like, absolutely. So this, I could have been anybody. You could have been anybody. But what developed was a really nice friendship, I would say. Does that story feel accurate to you?
Absolutely. Afternoon decaf. I remember the hashtag and everything.
Yeah, I'm so embarrassed that I would do that now. But it led to a very, very wonderful friendship. So Stephen, this is your second year or first year? I can't even remember. Second year at Kennesaw, right?
Second year, yeah.
Second year at Kennesaw State University, teaching full time there. Just wrapped up the Trumpet Festival of the Southeast. You want to talk a tiny bit about how that experience was?
Sure. Yeah, it was a really great time. TFSE for short happens every year on the same weekend as Martin Luther King Day of Remembrance. And it's just like a very fraternal gathering of trumpet players from throughout the Southeast. It's been going on since the early 2000s, and KSU was fortunate to host this year. And we had Ashley Hall-Ty and Kellen Hannis as our guests. And it was great. We set a new record for attendance and had like over 200 trumpet players there. Really good time.
That sounds so cool, man. Anyway, that's Stephen's introduction. What we're going to do today is kind of something a little bit different from what we normally do on the podcast. I've had Stephen on a couple of different times, and we've talked about him, but at a completely different stage in his life. So maybe it would be valuable to bring you back for kind of a more formal interview. But what I want to do today is, a while back, I created this diagnostic survey that asks a number of questions in these 8 different categories that I believe everybody needs to be proficient in to be able to have freedom and performance, sort of more enjoyment in their musical career, the pursuit of getting better. And Stephen filled this out just for at that time as kind of a favor. I kind of wanted to see what was the result of all this. But now we're getting together because what I want to do is I want to go through Stephen's results. And I want to ask him a whole bunch of questions to try to help dig down deep and understand what strengths and what areas of improvement Stephen might have, because my hope is to get to the bottom of one or two things that maybe Stephen, if he feels like there are things that are still struggles in his career, or his development, or his practice, or his performance, that we could find one or two things that if they were small little shifts could make a huge difference. And so this is kind of an exciting thing for me to be able to do, because the conversations I've had in the past surrounding this with people have been very, very amazing. I feel like I've learned things about people, and we've come to cool conclusions that neither of us were looking for. So I'm kind of excited just to see where it goes. My hope for you listening is that as we talk about these different categories, you listen to this conversation, maybe you could be reflective of your own relationship with these categories and where you lie, and maybe you can find some ideas surrounding how you might be able to get unstuck in certain things, or be confident that certain things you are strong in is actually a real asset to you in your musical career. So, you down for this, Stephen? Are we ready to go?
Let's go. I'm ready.
Okay, I want to cover what the categories are in total so everyone can see where we're going, or our listeners can see where we're going. And then we'll start with the first one and kind of go through. And then at the end, I think we'll try to synthesize everything and see if we can put it all together. So the first category is belief. And that is basically, do you believe the outcomes that you are desiring in your career are possible? 2, values. Values is, are you the type of person who's going to do the type of work to get where you want to go? 3 is identity. Identity is, do you know what you're trying to accomplish in the practice room? Do you know who you are as a musician? Do you know what you want an audience to hear? 4, organization. Organization, you could think of it as organizational structure. Basically, like, do you have a plan for your practice? Do you know how to, once you set that goal of where you want to go, do you know how to create a structure that will help you reach that goal and feel like you can take meaningful, even if they're small, meaningful steps toward that? 5 is practice strategies. This is basically, how are you going to practice that structure to maximize your results in the practice room? This is what a lot of people, I think of as practice, where you'd say, well, maybe I'll sing some stuff or buzz some stuff, or I'll alter the rhythms, or I'll play it slower. Those are all what I call practice strategies that we apply to various problems to help move the needle closer towards our desired identity. 6 is fundamentals. How solid are your fundamentals? Is this an area that needs to be developed, or is this something that's a real strength? We want to talk about that. 7 is musicianship. Obviously, we don't want to just stop at good trumpet playing. We want to be saying something with our playing. And I think it might even be, I mean, it's cool to think about Ashley Hall, Ty, and Kellen Hannes.
I always thought it was Hannes, and then I introduced her as Hannes this past weekend, and then she gets up on stage and goes, "Hi, I'm Kellen Hannes," and I go,
Kellen Hannes. I feel like they're both such interesting and amazing examples of their application of musicianship. Like, that's, I think, something that makes them special, probably why you thought of them, besides maybe the teaching aspect, probably why you thought of them as guest artists. And to me, it's a great example. I was just thinking about that. And then the last category is ease/flow. Can you do everything you need to be able to do on the instrument and make it sound easy? Can you let go of your concerns about your playing and just be in flow state and let things happen? I'm assuming also you heard plenty of examples of that at the Trumpet Festival of the Southeast. So I just kind of want to connect it to even some of these categories as what makes these people who have these opportunities special, and why they have them, and what makes them such great performers. So let's start with belief. As I am looking at your the summary of your answers and belief, it seems like you generally believe in yourself. You generally believe, not in yourself, but you generally believe that you have the potential to get where you want to go, so to speak. Like, you don't see yourself as like, this is blocked off, I can't do this, I can't do that. So a good growth mindset. But maybe some of what could erode your belief is maybe you see yourself in comparison to other people, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that? If you agree with that, what might that mean for you?
I definitely agree with that. A saying comes to mind: comparison is the thief of joy, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of us and listeners have probably heard that before. And that is certainly something, if I'm being vulnerable, that I've struggled with over the years. There are so many tremendous artists and technicians on the instrument in our field, and there's always that temptation to compare oneself to others. I think it's an area I've done a lot of growth in, but I definitely still catch myself doing it, especially when, you do take an audition or you do apply for X position, and then a few weeks later or a few months later, you end up seeing who was successful in that. It's hard to not beat yourself up or compare yourself to that person. Yeah. Okay. So one question I have right out of the bat, right out of the gate, you don't have to say like who this person is, but I'd like you to maybe conjure up an image of somebody maybe you feel like you compare yourself to in a way where maybe this is an example in your mind of where you feel like, not that you have less belief, but you're like, oh man, like that person's so much better. Maybe I won't reach that, or something like that. Are you thinking of somebody? Yeah.
Okay, cool. Can you then describe to me what about they're playing, or what about them is a whatever it is, probably let's just stick with playing. What makes you feel that way? Like, what specifically are you feeling is the gap between you and that person?
I think it's two things that stand out to me the most. The first one is there seems to be a degree of natural, I don't want to say natural ability and imply that there's not effort involved, but maybe ease would be a better word. But there seems to be a degree of like natural production or natural ease that I feel like I'm still searching to find. And then the second one, I think, is related to confidence. You know, we're all told that in order to really have success on the instrument, you have to have a degree of confidence that's almost like if it were being interpreted in a negative way, like someone might even look at that and say, oh, that person's cocky, or they're like a little too sure of themselves. But I've heard many teachers allude to this in trumpet playing. Like, you almost have to have an attitude of, this is the way this goes, and I know I can do this better than anyone else. And I think I've struggled to adopt that mindset at times, in part because I have hangups about not wanting to be perceived a certain way, like not wanting to be perceived as arrogant or as cocky or someone who thinks too highly of themselves.
Mm-hmm. I can understand that. Yeah. When you say a certain kind of confidence, right? You were just saying that, right? Confidence in what?
Your ability to execute, your ability to succeed, your ability to convey the musical idea that you need to convey.
Okay. So hypothetically speaking, if by the end of this conversation, we could give you something that's rooted in something you would feel good about saying, I am confident in this thing so you just described a result, right? Basically. Mm-hmm. Like confidence in your ability to execute. I perceive that as a result of something. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
How would you describe, like, what's your take on, like, or your description of what I mean by that?
So confidence being a result, confidence manifests itself as a result of you having done other certain work, is kind of how I'm interpreting that. Mm-hmm. Like if you have done X and Y and you feel sure of yourself in those areas, then confidence is going to manifest.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible then that some of those players that you look at that are almost... Now, those players exist, right? There are players out there who are so confident that it comes out and they're cocky. I'm going to set those people aside because I don't even think I don't agree with that. I perceive there's always somebody better. Doesn't matter how good you are. And also, it's not that serious. You know what I mean? Like, we're musicians. There's a certain serious element about what we're doing, but I perceive that, like, it's not so much about look how good I am. And so I'm going to set that aside. But there are other people out there who are what ChatGPT would say is quietly confident. I don't know how much you use ChatGPT, but it uses things like quietly a lot. And I would say that quiet confidence is a result of something, right? And so their confidence in, like, I know I can do this, and whether it's better than everybody else is separate from, like, I am confident this is what I want. Does that make sense? That could possibly be a result of the way that they approached something, the way they prepared or the way that they thought or whatever, and that instead of thinking so much about can I drive confidence in this result, but what if I shifted it over to the thing that causes the result and began to refine that to a point that it resulted in that kind of confidence I wanted? What I just said, does that make sense? Do you think that's, like, possible?
Yeah, I think that's possible. And that sounds exciting to explore too.
Yeah. Because to me, what I've experienced is that when I shifted from just trying to have a certain outcome to let me explore what could cause the outcomes I want in terms of how I thought, in terms of how I prepared, in terms of the feedback that I sought out, it kind of completely changed my relationship, right, with how I'm working and preparing, and ultimately my eventual confidence. And that's a huge part of what I'm hoping to explore, because belief is everything, right? Belief is like, if you don't believe something's possible, you're probably not going to do the type of things that you need to do to be able to improve, if that makes sense. Like if you don't think a double C is possible, how hard are you going to work to try to figure it out?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I wanted to address right out of the gate, not only because it's first, but because it's important to couch the rest of our conversation in what we really want to do more than anything is shift your belief that something is possible and give you tools to feel like you could actually move the needle on this specific thing that you maybe feel is difficult to achieve or even out of your reach. So that's kind of the direction I'm hoping to head in. If we could shift this belief and give you tools, what would that mean for you? Like, what would be the effect on you as a person, as a teacher, as a performer? How do you think it would affect you if you felt like you were able to match the ease or the freedom that those, or the confidence, that result of confidence? How would that change things for you?
Well, not to steal a word that you just used, but I think it would result in freedom. I think it would result in like mental and emotional freedom. I think it would result in freedom in my teaching and my approach as an educator, because if I'm operating from a place of greater and more stable belief in myself, then I'm going to be more well positioned to help my students find that and encourage them to adopt that kind of mindset. It seems like something that would be, fundamentally transformational to everything.
Yeah. Can we take it one step further? Like that's amazing. That sounds amazing. What would be the practical effect of that?
Success, fulfillment, or I should say deeper fulfillment. Because I'm fulfilled now, but there are still those what ifs, or man, it would be nice if. And to touch on another thing that you said a few minutes ago, I think it would also make it easier to let go a little bit and not put so much importance and weight and value on everything as if it's life or death.
So that would be pretty nice, right? A little bit of just like, you're almost describing like you're achieving the things that you want and you understand what you're doing to do it. And whether you're there or not, you can see you're making progress. It's almost like a personal freedom almost. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
What would that mean to you to have that?
Everything. Yeah. I think that would be huge. Like it would just remove so much pressure and so much stress and free up mental bandwidth to focus on other things. And I think it would also just help to put everything in perspective more too. As much as we all care about what we do musically, vocationally, and also for fulfillment, it helps to reframe that as this is still just one aspect of my life. It's one facet of my humanity, and it's not everything that I am.
Yeah, and that separation, that perspective is like super healthy because it means you can take this thing seriously, but it doesn't define you to the point where it controls you almost, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's good. What do you think?
I think that's good too.
Awesome. Okay, so this is exciting for me because obviously we've attached, like, if we could shift this thing, that's what you would get out of it, right? Mm-hmm. So then it's very important that we really dig down and try to figure out, like, it puts an amount of importance on this conversation, I think, because that's what's on the line in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So let's keep moving on. Values. So I'm just going to read you the first sentence that, again, just so we're clear, this is just ChatGPT summarizing the thing that it's all your words. It's all your answers. It's just sort of summarizing it to me. Stephen displays strong alignment with values such as honesty, kindness, patience, joy, and humility. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
What do you like? So agreeing with that, like, what do you think? How do you think this is an asset to you in your career or your practice or your performance?
Honesty is important because if you can't be honest with yourself about where you're at, then it's hard to be objective. I think kindness is important too when we're focused on like personal improvement, because it can be easy to start beating ourselves up and, associating a lack of progress or struggling with a certain task on Trumpet as being, oh, well, there must be something wrong with me. So like having the ability to remain kind to myself and make sure that I'm speaking about myself in a way that is kind, even when I'm being objective about areas in which I need to grow. The humility aspect, I think that is one thing that, while it's an asset and a strength, has also maybe affected the belief component for me a little bit. And we sort of already got into that with my answer to that. I'm willing to entertain the possibility, and actually I'm thinking that it's possibly likely, that in trying to like maintain a humble posture, I have created some false dichotomies in my own mind in terms of like, well, I can't be humble and also be confident. And I think that's maybe something that I need to explore. Like, that just came to me right now as a result of talking about these two things in tandem. So I'm curious what you think about that. What were the other two? Would you mind saying those again?
Mm-hmm. Kindness, patience, joy.
Well, patience is pretty important, right? we know it's a long game. Even when you have a great process in place, you have to be willing to persevere and put the time in, and wait for the results to take root and grow. And joy, I guess, like I just strive to always be a joyful person and look for things to celebrate, even when times seem hard or when you're frustrated. And I think that's going to inform a healthy and well-rounded approach to pursuing growth, because we all are going to deal with frustration and discouragement when things don't happen as quickly as we want them to. Yeah, that's what I got.
So there's two sort of questions. You can answer this one relatively simply if you want, but do you find that you are joyful in your patience, or do you find sometimes it's frustrating related to patience? Do you find yourself being frustrated sometimes that you have to wait still?
I do. Yeah. Like, if I'm being totally transparent, absolutely. And I think that's something a lot of people will relate to. I see patience personally, just my own life perspective. I see patience as a spiritual practice, and that's something that I try to exercise in various aspects of my life. And so, that's something where I often remind myself, or find myself giving mental reminders of, patience is a good thing to exercise. You've got to trust that if you have a good process in place, that it's going to take root and that it's going to work, but you got to give it time.
Yeah. And obviously, Stephen knows, like, we share those kinds of convictions. Like, I think there's a really beautiful angle of understanding patience being, we are, and we're going to talk about this. There's a certain amount of control I think we can wield on the process of improvement, but there is just the time it takes, even if you're doing everything 100% correctly. Like, we cannot force it after a certain point. This is something I have struggled with in my life, feeling like, oh, if I just try harder, if I just through willpower just want it more than everybody else, that means it'll happen more than, or it'll happen faster or something like that. I don't believe that anymore. And instead, I believe we should be focused on just maximizing what we can maximize in our practice, and then also focusing on being patient. So I agree with you. I think it's a very, very underrated and important thing to wrestle with, whether or not we have enough patience and tolerance for waiting for this career path, and sometimes how long things can take. You asked a question about humility and confidence and sort of this false dichotomy, and you asked like what I think. I would just throw it back at you and ask, what could it look like for someone to have a humble sort of posture towards things in life, but also be able to be confident? Like, if you said in an ideal world, how could these things interact with each other?
Yeah, that is a hard question for me to answer, because I think it's actually something that I've personally struggled to figure out. But in thinking about our discussion around belief and taking some of that and trying to apply it, I suppose what that could look like is, if we think of confidence as a result of preparation rather than as the goal, like the thing we're focused on, if we see it as a byproduct rather than that, then I think it is possible for someone to have a disposition that's rooted in humility while also being confident in their abilities because they know that they've prepared well and they have seen the results of their efforts manifesting in, I now have the skills to do these things as a musician or as a trumpet player, however you want to couch it. But I think that's also something I'm going to need to think about more.
Can I give you one more thought to ponder?
Sure.
If I said, I literally just thought of this. It's going to sound way too profound for who I am as a person. But if I said to you, humility is the precursor to confidence, what would that mean to you?
Oh my gosh.
Like humility leads to confidence. What would that mean to you?
Well, if humility is a value that I have, and if that's something that I strive to embody, and if that's a precursor to confidence, then I guess that would mean I'm headed in the right direction in terms of my own personal work. But maybe patience is a factor in there too.
I can explain what I mean, but I need to let me write this down really quick that we talked about this because I want to come back to it, but later when we have talked about more things. So humility leads to confidence, and all I want to say right now about that is I don't think we can get to a true level of deep-seated confidence until we're honest and real with ourselves about where we are currently at. And I think that's that's a posture of humility that says, like, I have stuff left to learn. Like, I'm not a completed product. This is something I've struggled with in my own life a lot. I just wanted the work to be enough. At a certain point in time, I just wanted to say, look how hard I've worked. Certainly this has to be enough to get me to the point where I could be successful at the level that I wanted, which was like principal in the New York Philharmonic, principal in the Chicago Symphony, or, like at the highest level, right? And I've had opportunities to audition for those orchestras and didn't get anywhere, right? And so instead of being humble enough to say, like, you know what, maybe it's not enough. Maybe I do actually need to improve and figure things out. I just tried to pretend that it was enough because I just didn't want to be real. There's an honesty and a humility thing that you were talking about that are intertwined with each other. But I want to talk about these next categories and then revisit, I think, a little bit more about what I mean. So I think that could be sort of a thing that we will try to see if we can fully flesh out for you, so that we can show how this current strength of yours, humility, will actually lead to this thing that maybe you want to be able to have, but you've created this false dichotomy that you can't have it. And I think it's important that you use the word can't, because if you say that this can't happen, how hard are you going to work to try to figure out if it's possible?
Yeah.
Right? So let's explore that. The only other thing I saw here is that he shows awareness that discipline and consistency have become harder to maintain amid professional demand. So it sounds like that you need to be disciplined, but maybe your life as a professor is busier than you thought it was going to be, or is just as busy as you knew it would be, and it's harder to maintain that. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I've been teaching full time now this is my 8th year in higher ed teaching full time, but it is only my 2nd year in a tenure track position at a major research university with a much larger studio than I've ever had to teach before. So like right now, my colleague Ryan Moser and I, we teach 18 students. I teach a trumpet pedagogy and lit class. I'm also brass area coordinator, so I'm responsible for 3 or 4 brass quintets. We team teach the trumpet ensemble at KSU. Then that's not even counting the committee work and all the service. And then running something like TFSE was quite literally hundreds of hours of work, going all the way back to last April. So it's a lot. And anybody who's in higher ed listening to this is probably, smiling to themselves because they know it's a lot too. And I was prepared for that. Mentally, I knew it was going to be a heavy lift. But that combined with trying to be an attentive and responsible husband and trying to make sure that I'm like doing my fair share and pulling my weight at home in terms of chores and just managing the household, co-managing the household, as well as like making sure I'm setting time aside for things like taking care of my body and making sure that I'm exercising consistently throughout the week. It's just getting harder and harder to make sure that I'm doing all the things that I want to be doing and that I know that are important for me. So that in some ways has helped me because I have found a little more efficiency in terms of, okay, I have 90 minutes to spend on the trumpet today. How am I going to get through everything that I need to get through? But that also feels limiting to me because I feel like there's a point of diminishing return where you can try to strive for maximum efficiency in the practice room. But at a certain point, sometimes you do just need more time if you want to, make sure you get to B flat and C and cornet and piccolo and E flat and flugelhorn and Baroque trumpet and everything else, like all the things I'm expected to be able to do as someone who's in academia. Mm-hmm. So that's been a struggle, but I do feel like I've made some progress in it. And I've also come to the realization that there may be seasons, like there may be times where I just need to say, okay, I'm going to devote 20% more of my time to specifically preparing in the orchestral idiom if that's something that I want to round out in my skill set. Or, okay, I need to devote 20% more of my time to practicing soloing over 2-5-1s if I know I have like a string of jazz gigs coming up and I want to be more prepared for those. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it sounds like a lot. And I think the first question that comes to my mind, and don't take this the wrong way, it's just a question, but is there anything that you are currently doing that you don't have to be doing?
Probably.
Yeah. So I think that sometimes is an important question to ask, because a lot of times we get pulled in the directions of what do other people expect of us. And sometimes I've seen this with my students a lot. Maybe you see it with your students too. There's like a whole bunch of people that have expectations of them. Mm-hmm. All their different teachers want different things of them, and the students want to do a good job. They want to try to make everybody happy. But they sometimes that can feel like it's going to squeeze out the things that they care about and the things that will develop them in the way that they care about being developed. Like let's just say as a baseline trumpet player, obviously if you're there for performance, hopefully you feel like you have time. But I know like my ed major students sometimes feel like there's like not as much time to do what they want to be able to do. It depends even on the school you're at. Some schools have different demands than other schools. And obviously you're describing a situation in which like your job demands and the other projects that come along with that are kind of squeezing that out. So there's two sort of answers to this. One, again, what does it look like to be more efficient? And we will talk about that. We have talked about that a lot over the years. But the other one is like, is there something that I'm doing that someone has an expectation of me that maybe I don't have to be doing, or I could delegate or something along those lines that would make it so I could borrow just a little bit more of my time from somewhere and allocate it to this thing that's actually like supremely important to me. And I just think it would be worth, I'm not going to make you answer that right now because that would take some time, but I think that's worth thinking about. And then are you the type of person who's going to do the type of thing to get where you want to go, which would be to advocate for yourself in that way? Do you feel like you're someone who's good at advocating for yourself?
I think I've gotten better at it. Another challenge of many professions, but I see this in higher ed especially, is like once you do land that first tenure track job and you're on the tenure clock and you have to produce all of these things and show that you're worthy of keeping your job, there can be this immense pressure to be like a yes man or a yes woman where you say yes to everything because you're trying to please all these people. But I've also gotten some sage advice from a lot of people who have said, you don't really need to say yes to everything. And you can be a little more discerning in terms of what commitments you agree to take on and which commitments you set up barriers and say, hey, actually, I'm already doing X, Y, and Z. And while I'd love to help with this, I don't really have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
So I do feel like that's an area that I've grown some in, but I also know my tendency is I want to help people. There's a part of me who feels that that desire to be the person who can come in and say, yes, I will help you take care of that. And so I have been trying to do some work to be better about thinking about what I actually have capacity for and not saying yes to everything that comes along.
Yeah. And so like part of this would then, going back to the belief question, part of it is just like, are you able to do the type of things that are going to move the needle in this thing that you want to be able to improve? And sometimes the answer to that is going to be no. It's like, it's all about trade-offs at a certain point in your life. It's just about trade-offs, right? Mm-hmm. What's important to me, but what things do I feel like are more important to me? We all have sort of priorities, if that makes sense. And so again, we don't have to belabor this point, but I think it is worth thinking about. If there's situations in which you feel comfortable saying, hey, I don't have the bandwidth for that kind of thing, at least right now, maybe we can revisit this in X amount of months and see what life is like at that point. But I think that's worth it. And the only reason I'm saying that is because in the context of this conversation, I am solely concerned about you as a trumpet player. There are many other things that you care about that you have to balance on top of that. So I just want to be very clear. This is for me to help you move forward as a trumpet player specifically, maybe in other parts of your career, but that's outside of the scope in many ways. So take that with a grain of salt. I want to move on to, and we're going to talk about organization in just a second, which I think is going to be a big part of this conversation, but identity. It seems like I don't think we actually have to dig into this too hard, because I think it's what is related to the belief thing. Essentially, in situations that you know you can do, you've done a lot, you feel confident. And in situations that you have less experience in, maybe you feel less confident in. Do you think that's a fair summary of kind of where your identity lies in terms of a performer and all that?
Absolutely. And I would just add to that, I identify very strongly as a versatile trumpet player. I think that's one of my strengths, and I think that's one of the strengths of many people in higher education who are required to teach varying styles and varying approaches to trumpet playing. But I am super comfortable like playing section trumpet in an orchestra one weekend and then, heading to Denver and covering a few shows of the national tour of Book of Mormon a few weekends after that. And then 2 weeks after that, like being a sideman on a jazz gig and having to read charts, but also, take a couple choruses on a blues or whatever. And I'm proud of that. And I love that that's a strength of mine. But I do think that has also, in many ways, made it harder for me to see myself as someone who is a real expert or a real specialist in specific styles or areas. Like I would not consider myself to be the authority on principal trumpet in an orchestra, even though that's something that like I still daydream about doing. And so that has been an identity struggle, especially where I sometimes feel these pressures of like, I have to be all these things so that I can teach all these things and mentor students who have those goals, et cetera.
For sure. Can you recall that person I was asking you to think about earlier?
Yeah.
Can you recall that person? What style or what style of playing does that person do that you feel like you struggle to achieve?
Definitely orchestral.
Yeah. So do you feel like the orchestral side is if you had to name one sort of style, do you feel like it would be the orchestral style that feels like if you could grow in that one area, do you feel like that would shore up most of this, or are there other styles also?
I do think that orchestral is definitely the biggest one. Mm-hmm. And even like, if we want to be more specific within that, like leading a section and like principal trumpet role, I do have a decent amount of orchestral experience, but most of it is as a section player. And I've also sort of hit a ceiling in terms of like the caliber or level of orchestra, if you will. Like I've been very fortunate to sub a few times with some great orchestras, but it's still a bucket list item to get to sub with like the Atlanta Symphony or, a group like Philadelphia or something like that. Like it would be so cool to get to do that someday. But I feel like I'm further away from that than I would like to be.
Okay. Let's move on to the organization question, because it's an identity and half organization. What do you feel like? Could you define what it is you feel like you do not do well enough to be successful in an environment like Atlanta or Philadelphia?
I think I have figured out some things with sound and projection and resonance, as well as the orchestral concept of articulation, but I don't feel like I'm where I need to be yet. And that's also reflective of some of the feedback I've gotten when I've taken recent auditions. There was an audition I took in August of last fall where the feedback I got from the committee was, we almost advanced this person. Like, he sounded very good. He was very consistent. He played very accurately. But there were just a few times where like the concept of articulation was not consistent, or, there was a brief lapse in the sound concept of like an orchestral trumpet player. And those were the things that like held this person back from advancing to the next round. And on the one hand, that was encouraging because it was like, wow, I almost advanced. That's awesome. But at the same time, it sort of reinforced my beliefs that these are areas I need to grow in.
Yeah. So would you say, just as a clarifying thing, when you say that you struggle to have total amount of confidence, is it across all performance or in this one domain mostly?
It's mostly in this one domain. I don't find myself feeling less confident in these areas when I'm playing a solo recital or when I'm playing with the faculty brass quintet at KSU, for example. I feel more comfortable in those idioms, generally speaking.
Okay.
And I'm not 100% sure why that is.
Do you feel like you're less humble in those scenarios?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. I'm gonna try to tie. I have an idea. I have a thread. I just want to get through the whole thing and tie it together. So what it says here is organization is a key developmental area for you. Why do you think it would say that? What about the way you answered it or the way you feel like you're practicing and working right now that that ChatGPT would indicate that of all of the categories, this is a category you can improve in?
I think it probably says that because in my answers and also just in how I see myself, organization is an area that I feel like has been a place of continuous growth in my life. I tell my students this all the time because their perception of me is that I'm this highly organized person. But I tell them all the time that I don't see myself that way, and that if they could have seen me when I was their age, I was not that guy. I was highly disorganized, and it's something that I've had to work incredibly hard at because it's something that is a highly valued trait and skill in what we do. And I saw that early on. And so it's something that I have been trying to better myself in terms of my practice. It's something you and I have worked on a ton. Like when you taught me how to program my practice, that was really the first time in my life that I had been that organized and that detailed in how I practiced trumpet. And I was in my late 20s, and had completed 2 degrees and was about to start a third one, So I think that's probably why organization is flagged as like a key area for growth for me.
It's interesting. I mean, do you feel that you've been able to continue the things that we talked about separate from us working together?
Actually, yes. I mean, so for TFSE, I performed a couple of times. I played a fanfare on the opening concert. Then I played the Concertino Classico with Ashley, which is like a 10-minute piece. And then I played the first minute of the Vivaldi Concerto for 2 trumpets with one of my students the next day. 3 different instruments, 3 varying styles of music. And the way I prepared for those was I made practice programs the same way you taught me. And I prepared all of that rep in about 2 weeks, and it all went really well. So that is something I have tried to continue in how I prepare.
So then it says here, he recognizes that creating structure would ultimately save time, but struggles to prioritize it amidst competing demands. So can you tell me a little bit about, it sounds like you know what to do, but maybe you're not doing it as often as you could be for whatever your goals may be. And now I'm almost thinking that I will just say it and we can put a pin in it and you can answer that question. But I'm almost thinking organization is not actually the thing that is holding you back in terms of growing in your orchestral specifically in this thing? Because look, we're talking about trying to, I mean, organization as a whole is, but do you feel like you understand it well enough to achieve your goals?
I do think I have a good enough understanding of it. I think what often holds me back is my perception that other things are getting in the way. And as we're talking about this too, the other thing I'm realizing is that I probably have not done as good of a job as I can of applying this organization to certain key fundamental areas. I'm very good about applying it to repertoire, like when I have a recital coming up or when I'm preparing for a week-long run out of quintet shows or whatever. But I haven't really applied programming my practice in the same way to things like building my sound in the orchestral style or articulation or some of those other things I mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to come back to humility leads to confidence. I want to come back to that. What you just said is an act of humility, right? I am realizing this could be different. This could be better, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just follow the thread. Let's say that you now have this realization, I am not applying the same kind of organizational structure, practice program type thing to development in your fundamentals. Let's say you did. What would be the effect of that?
Progress in the areas that I want to see progress in, for sure. And I think the other product could be some of that confidence, and not confidence like in a swagger way or a cocky way, the social perceptions of it that I see as negative, but confidence that's grounded in effort and in results.
Yeah. Can I reframe that?
Please.
What if I said confidence means understanding? What do you think that would mean?
Confidence means understanding.
That may not be the most eloquent way to say it, but it is what I'm after. Like, what's your interpretation of that?
I think my interpretation is that that's a way of reframing confidence so that one sees it as an asset rather than as like a character flaw.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit more. If you had total understanding of how to prepare, you had total understanding of how to apply organization to your fundamentals, if you had total understanding of what exactly you were looking for in terms of what you were developing, if you had total understanding, or clarity could be another word, confidence comes from clarity. If you had total clarity on how you were going to practice, that led to that, and then you had total confidence that you had clarity, that you understood what you need to do to produce the outcomes that you want to produce, and you had heard yourself produce those outcomes a whole bunch of times, so you have evidence that you are that player, and that led to confidence. We're almost saying that confidence is a result of clarity, right? But we can't gain clarity on the things that we don't know until we have enough humility to say, I don't know that thing, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So that's kind of what I mean. Humility leads to confidence. You just basically acknowledged, okay, I'm humble enough to say, maybe I'm not approaching my fundamentals in the way that will lead me to where I want to go. So what I need to do, the key component here then is, how do I approach my fundamentals? Because if your fundamental structure and the way you practice it can lead to more clarity surrounding what you want, and then that clarity allows you to repeat success in that area because you know how you're doing it, that over time will lead to confidence that you can indeed produce or execute, to use your word, the way you want to. Does this make sense, how humility could lead to confidence a little bit more now?
It does, yeah.
Do you see how this kind of confidence is not rooted in like arrogance and sort of puffing yourself up, but it's rooted in, I was humble enough to go figure out what I didn't know?
Yeah. And just
how does that feel?
It feels good. And it's helping me realize that if we take this conversation and broaden it beyond Trumpet for just a second, like, there's definitely some work I can do in terms of, changing my perception or the way that I relate to this idea of confidence and what it is, because I'm realizing that I have kind of associated confidence with something that that's negative, almost like a character flaw. And I've kind of conflated confidence and arrogance, if you will. And because I've been, because I don't want to be perceived as that, I think I've kind of shied away from confidence as something that's like not for me. And that's a belief that needs to change, I think.
Isn't that cool?
Very cool.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Yeah, man.
I want to revisit something related to identity, but I want to get through the rest of the thing. So practice strategies. This says this is a strength of yours, that you really digging in, figuring things out, trying to figure out how to make progress. This seems like something, a part of the process you enjoy. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do love the process, and I'm deeply committed to the process, and I enjoy working the process for sure.
Yeah, cool. We could talk a little bit about things you do to work the process. But I think for right now, just to keep this, it's already going to be a relatively lengthy conversation. I think we'll just kind of keep moving. But this seems like something an area you feel confident in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, I think it's because it is something that I have been shown how to do systematically. And you have a lot to do with that in the last 5 years. And I have had success with it. Like after working these practice strategies and working the process, I had some of the most successful performances of my life. You know, like I think back to that spring of 2022 and 2023 when we were working together, and I had some of those crazy 2 and 3 month stints where I was like performing the whole Peskin concerto with orchestra. And then I was also playing this crazy lead trumpet thing that was written for Jens Lindemann with the Wind Symphony. And at the same time as all of that, I was like taking auditions and playing all of these really heavy orchestra programs. I don't think I would have been able to do that, 2 or 3 years prior, but it was because I had this process that I felt, skilled enough, prepared enough, confident enough to have success. So I think that's largely where it comes from. And I've just kind of been riding that wave.
Yeah. I kind of changed my mind. I'd love for you to share one sort of practice strategy or one way you approach practice that you feel like has made a really big impact for our listeners to be able to maybe try out.
Yeah. Something that I do now after working with Ryan that I did not used to do is I actually do fewer repetitions, and I listen more critically, and I take time in between to think about what didn't go well in that repetition. Whereas before I would just rep things over and over and over. And I used to do things like I would start preparing for a recital 3 or 4 months prior to the recital. And I would work up to doing 2 or 3 full run-throughs of the recital every day so that I didn't worry about having enough endurance to get through the program. And I don't do that anymore. What a typical day looks like now is I have a section of a piece that I'm going to play no more than 3 times. And in between each of those 3 repetitions, I sing through it, or I listen back to a practice recording that I took, and I analyze it and critique it. And I write down notes about things that I need to improve on it. And then I move on, even if it doesn't feel like it's ready to move on. And that's a huge change in my practice strategy that came about as a result of our work together. So,
yeah. Well, try that out. If you are looking to try something different in your practice. Let's move on to your fundamentals. Now, okay, so I just want to say really quickly, fundamentals is something that everybody wants to get better at. We just covered 5 categories that we could, probably you and I can see now how much impact getting things ordered in these 5 categories would affect how well your fundamentals could be developed. If you had a clear identity surrounding what you wanted to do, you applied that sort of that structure you're saying maybe you could be applying to your fundamentals. If you applied that using these practice strategies that you have to move the needle, and you believe that fundamentals are something you can develop, or you believe it's possible to grow in these areas, and you are the type of person who sets aside the time, approaches it with humility and honesty and curiosity, we could imagine how just solid fundamentals will be a result of that. almost, right?
Mhm.
Not this thing we are striving to do, but actually it's a result of striving to do these other things. What are your thoughts on that?
That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think it's a good summarization of the whole conversation we've been having up to this point.
Yeah. So my assumption is that you feel pretty solid about your fundamentals, except for in issues relating to like orchestral articulation and production.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that I can guess that based on the entire conversation that your fundamentals are quite solid. Like you're in a good place. You're just looking for more. You're looking to continue to develop. But it sounds like as a performer, you want those opportunities and to feel confident that you can sit kind of anywhere and feel great. But also as a teacher, you want to be able to share these ideas with students, and if that's the direction they want to be able to go in. And so you've already talked also about kind of what that would mean for you. So we don't have to sit there. Musicianship. What do you think about musicianship? Is your ability to focus on producing that? Do you feel like musicianship is what you're focused on when you're performing? Do you feel like there are times where you're more focused on just trying to play the trumpet well, or you're focused on other things? Do you feel like you have room to grow in your musicianship? I'm just kind of curious to see kind of how you see yourself in this way.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to identify some common themes here, for sure. First of all, yes, I definitely feel like I have room to grow in my musicianship. I see that as an area where continuous, uninterrupted growth is possible. And I'm always striving to be more musical and more expressive and more authentic. I find that I am most musical and I have the most confidence in my musicianship when I'm playing as a soloist, as a recitalist, as a chamber musician. And I am almost always thinking from a place of musicality in those contexts.
And you've done that the most in your career, right?
Yes, especially in the last 4 years.
So there's a correlation there, I would assume.
For sure.
Yeah. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And because I've had success in those types of performances too, that success has reinforced my belief in myself and the image that I've kind of created. When I perform in more orchestral contexts, I definitely find myself thinking more about mechanics and production and like trumpet thought. Mm-hmm. And that's something I've identified previously as like, okay, this is happening, and it's probably happening because I'm less secure in my abilities in those contexts. So
yeah, put a pin in that. Ease and flow. I hope you can see also that ease and flow is just a result of everything we've talked about. If you get proper alignment in these things, and you can get evidence that these things are true, and your fundamentals are in your performance, it's just easier to begin to trust that you can let go. You don't have to hold on to everything so tightly. And I think this is something we can prepare for, especially towards the end. So as we get near a particular, this is something I've developed since we've worked together, but as we get nearer to a performance event, I believe we actually need to practice letting go of the technique and immersing ourselves in whatever thoughts are going to result in us playing musically and feeling like we're presenting the music. But I'm assuming you can see how you just described that you can probably do that pretty much easier in a solo recital chamber sense than you can in an orchestral sense. So what I'm gathering from our entire conversation, well, would you say that's true, first of all?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. What I'm gathering from our conversation is that in your musical performing life, you generally have a healthy amount of belief, but surrounding this one area, if we could just get you some strategies that would feel like at minimum you are moving the needle, you are seeing some sort of progress in your development as an orchestral player, where you feel like you are sounding more like something that you want to be sounding like, that you would feel like that would almost round out your confidence, and you would just have just almost like you were describing a renewed sense of freedom surrounding all sorts of performance. Like you could take any gig and feel like you're gonna be good. You could sit anywhere and do anything you want to do, and you would have that confidence. Does that feel like it's an accurate, some sort of summary of our conversation so far?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I'm just going to repeat back to you. I'm going to give you one more thought related to identity, and then I'm going to repeat back to you what you said, and we're going to see if that's a solution, because I believe you've already identified what the solution is to this in the way you've responded. The only question I'm going to ask is, do you feel like you have a clear idea of what you're looking for in terms of what you're trying to develop orchestrally? Like, and when I say clear idea, I mean, do you think you understand what you're looking for to the degree that I understand what I'm looking for?
No.
Okay. So obviously we need to address that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that ties into the musicianship part of it, but almost like a musical identity type situation, not in your ability to focus on musicianship or develop musicianship, but more so on like to the base level, like identity part of like, I don't know exactly what it is. Can you agree with me that you probably feel like you have that as a soloist?
Yes.
So then is the assumption, if you could get that kind of clarity as an orchestral player, do you feel like almost as a byproduct of that, you would be able to achieve this goal?
Yes.
Okay. So how are you going to do that?
That's a good question. I think that's where I start to feel less confident in how to move forward.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you some ideas. Obviously, the clearest thing to go to is listening, right? Like listening to great players. I assume you've done that, though. How helpful do you feel like that has been in your development in terms of like, I listen to this player, I hear what they're doing, and I try to copy that? How helpful do you think that is?
I do feel like it has been helpful. I will say that like as I've gotten better and as my skills in those areas have grown, I do feel like the returns from that listening work have diminished over time, especially when we're talking about like listening to recordings. I do find that when I am able to make the time to like go and get a lesson, whether that's like going over and playing for you or, you know, going back up to Cincinnati and playing for some of my trusted people up there, I get much, much more out of those listening sessions where I can be right there in the room with the sound and everything.
Mm-hmm. So is it safe to say that if a point of prioritization for you moving forward would be doing that, do you think that would move the needle?
For sure.
So like if you were to say, separate from everything else that I could be doing, I need to like look at my schedule. I need to put on my to-doist like list of things to do, reach out to people to gauge interest in playing and say, this is, and like be clear about what I'm looking for. Like that could be a good first step in feeling like, hey, I've just taken the first step towards actually working on this thing that I know that I can do, but I feel maybe a little bit stuck on. Do you feel like that's, I guess, accurate or fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. I do this. This is one of the things that I do. You know that. So we can talk about that later if you want. But whether it's me or somebody else, I agree with you that I think you're at a point where not that you've maximized what you can do, but if you want to get there faster, or you don't want to have as much trial and error, which can be, trial and error can be good from the perspective of you're like learning what does and doesn't work. So there's a certain ownership there, but with how busy you are and at the level you're trying to play and with the demands on you, having it be more expedited is probably something that would be valuable to you. Yeah. So I would say that component, and then you've already said if you just then apply the organizational strategies that make you successful in performance for things like repertoire, if you just applied that to your fundamentals in some way, that you would then be able to say, I have this clear picture and I'm using my fundamentals to move me closer to that picture. It seems like those two things, what do you think that could solve this problem?
Yes.
How so? How could this solve that problem?
Well, working backwards, applying the organizational strategies that I already have an understanding of to the specific concepts and areas that I want to grow in. I already have belief and trust that that process will work. So I know that that's going to move the needle. I also know that just in terms of like having a greater understanding, I need to have more time spent and have more opportunities in hearing exactly what it is I'm trying to reproduce sound wise, both in terms of like sound color and projection and also articulation. And I know that I've kind of hit a wall there in terms of like, I listen to recordings all the time and I do still get benefit out of that, but there's a difference between that and being right there in the same room with somebody who's producing it, where you can hear it, you can feel it, you can see it, and you can get immediate feedback on whether or not you're producing a similar or the same sound. And I know that's something I've shied away from more recently for a couple of reasons. Some of it is schedule and busyness, but I also think some of it too has been insecurity. Like as I continue on in my professional journey, like I'm a professor at a big school, people are starting to know who I am locally in the Atlanta scene. And so for a lot of people, there's stigmas around like, you know, when is it appropriate or not appropriate to go play for people? Personally, I have no issue like going to someone and humbling myself and saying, I want to get a lesson. One thing I've run into here, and I've talked to some of my colleagues in Atlanta about this, is there's even been a little bit of reluctance on the part of some people that I've reached out to about getting together and working with me.
There's nothing you can do about that.
Right. You know, but you know, there are solutions to that even too. And I don't put that out there as like an excuse. Like I know you're just a couple hours away and I've gone over and played for you before, but like I could be more diligent about trying to set some time up to do that. I know there's people in Cincinnati who would hear me play. And I'm sure there are some people in the Atlanta area who would too, but some of the folks I've reached out to, sure, it just hasn't worked out.
Yeah. So it seems like these two things, we have some clarity surrounding this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That maybe you didn't have as much clarity sort of zeroing in on, here are these two things that of all the things you could be doing, this is going to move the needle in this way that's most important to you right now. I want to revisit what you said at the beginning. If you do these two things and you move the needle, what do you get out of that?
I think there's multiple layers. On a surface level, I'm going to get good in the sense that I'm going to strengthen my skill sets in the orchestral idiom, but I think that's going to have a ripple effect too, because that understanding is going to lead to greater confidence in that aspect of my musicianship, therefore a greater confidence as a whole in terms of how I see myself as a musician and my musical identity. And I think that is also going to lead to some of the other byproducts we talked about, like if I have more security in my ability to perform or to execute on the instrument, that will hopefully allow me to let go a little bit and have more freedom and put less importance on it. And not saying that it shouldn't be important, because we take our art very seriously, but I think you get what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Put less importance on it in terms of like, not every gig or not every performance is life or death.
Yeah. How would that change your life if you had that?
For the better, I think.
So there's some motivation to follow through on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
How are you feeling right now?
I feel good. I feel hopeful. I feel like I have a clear path forward. And I also feel a sense of responsibility too, in a good way. Because it's like, now that this is clarified for me, the ball's in my court. I can choose to do this, or I can choose to continue doing things the way that I am currently. And while that's working for me okay, I am someone who's interested in growth. I am someone who's interested in continuous improvement. And so there's a strong motivation to act.
Yeah. This has been a very awesome conversation for me. I hope you feel, again, like I said at the beginning of this whole thing, like we have no idea where it's going to go, but it's been very cool for me to learn about you, you know, in this way, and to try to support you and to try to be someone who's just a sounding board to provide this clarity. I really appreciate your willingness to be honest and sort of approach this conversation that way. If somebody wants to reach out to you and just sort of say, hey, I also appreciate like you sharing those things. I resonate with this or I resonate with that, maybe to connect, how would somebody do that?
Yeah, I would love to hear from anybody. And I promise I will say how to get in touch with me, but I'll also just add quickly, I think part of why it's easy for me, or I shouldn't say easy, but part of why I'm so open and willing to be honest is because I believe we're all on this journey together. And I also believe we need to tear down this idea that like people who have a gig or who have some semblance of stability in the professional world are, you know, somehow done with this work. I think we need to tear down that idea, because I think it can be hurtful. And I think it also messages to students that like there are people who have made it and people who haven't. I think that vulnerability is really important and really powerful. So that's why I'm so willing to like be vulnerable and be honest, even though it means like being pretty direct and blunt about some of my insecurities and weaknesses. But
Sure.
Ways to get in touch with me. Email is always super easy. You can find me at swadsock@kennesaw.edu, or even if you just Google Stephen Wadsack, that's going to pull up my personal website, which has a contact form, and it'll also pull up the KSU faculty website. I'm also very reachable on Instagram. You can find me at Stephen Wadsack, and I'd love to talk to anybody.
Well, dude, I thank you for your time, and thank you for this conversation. I appreciate our friendship a lot. I want to thank Brandon Yoakum for his work on mastering this episode of the podcast. You can check out Brandon at epiphanyrecordingstudio.com. And most of all, I want to thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you in the next one.